When a bunch of people pick him up and say, stop telling me I'm a loser, stop telling me resistance is futile. Going back briefly to Piers Morgan, they were doing stuff, to be behind the scenes, so I blew up at them. And it was so out of line to get out of the coma and get out of the trance. And I didn't even understand it. You sent me a text like 30 minutes after, I guess you'd seen it. You said, that was the greatest ever. You've broken the trance. And it shows the little guy has the power pulling the curtain back. And I do think, because I'm not hyping things just because I'm in it, I think that was a Wizard of Oz moment.
I agree with you, because we don't know. Look, we're all struggling. I talk to people all the time. We're all struggling what this all really means. And there's tons of stuff that don't fall into the realm of conspiracy. How are we going to reconcile carbon taxes? How are we going to reconcile the cost of Obamacare? Every time they come out with a new estimate, it's double, triple, quadruple what they originally sold it as. I mean, these are very real things.
It's bankrupting everybody, I know.
Right. Okay, so these are real things. So as we're all trying to reconcile where this is all headed, if it is globalism, if there's some sort of massive cabal underfoot, if somebody up at the top is rationalizing, hey, at the end of the day, this will be perfect. Yeah, you'll all be opiated, on your soma, but we won't have wars anymore, and there won't be crime anymore because everyone will be wearing some kind of tracking.
That's what they say, yeah.
Right. So maybe it is some sort of crazy quasi-spiritual justification. I think most people in their heart don't resonate with that idea. We were taught in 1984 in school as this is the idea where we don't want it to go. And people resonate with that.
That's not who we are.
Exactly. So back to the point, and this is why I would encourage you to push for more spiritual subject matter in a non-dogmatic way.
Universal.
Right. People, look, what was interesting to me about that, because I'm not a gun owner, I'm not a total anti-violence on every level if possible, except probably my big mouth. But it was such a rare thing to see a person being real on television. Just the act of being real. I'm a real person, I'm saying a real thing. I'm not controlled by the environment, like you said, in the Wizard of Oz castle. That alone, just that alone, is paradigm shattering. And
that's why it was uncomfortable for people.
Yes, but here's the thing. You also have generations now growing up watching YouTube clips of cats playing piano and people doing silly things, but they're also seeing citizen reporters, things like that. So these two worlds are kind of coming together, and they're ultimately going to clash, right? As you point out, the ratings on many of these programs really aren't that big. Sometimes the Drudge will put he always has the ratings. It's shocking, the ratings. That's what I'm saying is we're entering this kind of interesting tipping point where who's going to control the message, right? Who's going to control the message? And I think it's important if information is like, the Linus ball, this big thing of dirt, I think it's important to put in value systems that everybody can resonate with that are apolitical. You oftentimes talk about your family, you talk about nature. I think these are really important things to kind of lend depth to the argument.
I agree. I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you said this at dinner, but this is something I really realized. I get angry at myself when I'm walking on the Greenbelt and I saw the other day the moon and sun up at the same time with like clouds, and I was like, this is hallucination good. I mean, this was gorgeous. And just the birds and the wind and the smell of some flowers, and I'm down there walking with my dogs, and I thought, it's horrible that I'm even giving the system all this power about how evil they are and all the things they're doing. But I've got to get people who are at a lower level to realize that's happening, to get them to look up. The system wants to keep us in an artificial box, and that's what this matrix thing's all about, to not see and feel the universe around us. So I get what you're saying, but how do you translate that? Because, yes.
I think you have to turn to people who have... let's call it a deeper well of perspective that is timeless. So I would love to see on your program you talk to people who are Native American elders, who have a spiritual architecture and engineering that can talk about how someone 400 years ago would have viewed. I mean, how did the Native American population? If you've ever read Black Elk Speaks, that's an interesting thing. He had visions about how his tribe and his Indian nation were going to be overrun by the white people. And look, I'm no expert in Native American affairs, but what are the chances now that the Native American population of America would ever go back to the way it used to be? Very small, right? Whatever's happened, even though most of it's incredibly unjust and continues to be. So the point of moving forward is a point of integration. Like it's that old, it's like in Star Wars, same thing. It's like, what does the enemy teach us about ourselves? I watched the Star Wars recently where Luke's got to go in the weird thing, and he ends up, defeating the ghost Darth Vader
himself.
And it's really himself. And I mean, that's what spiritual languaging teaches us, is that, and back to what I wanted to try to address, is propaganda works on the idea that they're going to touch something in you that you're afraid of. It's fascinating sometimes to read people's comments. I mean, there'll be something that very much concerns them, and it breaks down in these sort of interscene squabbles that don't have anything to do with the thing that was being talked about, because they actually can't deal with the issue that's being presented.
That's why they'll distract off into some conspiracy that has no basis in reality, instead of the trillion-pound elephant hiding right there in the room. Now, I just hope that viewers out there realize that you have inherent power. I think that's what Billy was saying earlier. It's the basic bedrock spiritual things, our conscience, our programming, things we know are true. That's what threatens the system.
I think most people have a hard time understanding it, let's call it, at its highest levels. Like if we went out the door or down the street and went to the Burger King and we pulled somebody out from behind the counter, I think they'd probably have a hard time believing that their senator or their president or whatever are inherently evil. Whether you or I could make an argument for better or worse, right? But when they see things in their own communities, when they see things up close that really resonate with them, for example, the woman that you had on, because she was from my area, about where they forced the RF, the smart
meter on her house.
Yeah, that's, I grew up basically 10 miles away from where she lives. That's the kind of stuff that people go, well, wait a second,
And she's videotaping on her own property, the police without warrants putting a meter that dials in and spies on you on record.
Mm-hmm.
On record. And then she and her neighbors are arrested. I mean, look, my crew can't hand out our magazines downtown. They write us tickets.
That's what I'm saying. That's the kind of thing that people can relate to. So when you start to connect those experiences, if they have a perspective by which they can start to see where they can do something about it, that's the difference. And I think activism is a weird thing. I mean, you can stand up at your local council and, like that woman said, they'd formed this organization, and for 2 years they'd met with city council. And obviously, I think in the story that she told, the city council had accepted some $11 million from the government, and they weren't going back on that decision. So she's basically facing a brick wall, no matter how realistic her arguments were. So there's an inherent negative. She can't get anywhere. She doesn't want this thing in her house. But that video that they made was very, very powerful. That's a real thing that
everybody's seen millions of times. No.
Right. That's what I'm.
So what is the system going to do? We should talk about this.
Well, ultimately, if we look at history, they're going to try to either shut down alternative media, or they're going to try to control it, or they'll create their own Alex Joneses. I look at it from the intuitive point of view, which is you have to trust something above yourself, whether it's your own familial intelligence or God or whatever you believe in, or if you don't believe in anything.
There is a power to turning loose and believing in it actually does work.
Like, look, I've been on stage, I don't know, 2,500 times, and I faced, people throwing stuff and all. If you go up there waiting for it, in a way it almost kind of invites it. Now, that doesn't mean I'm weak if I go up on stage not anticipating it, but you have to sort of it's sort of like the Jedi Knight thing. You got to be prepared, but you don't walk around in a state of anxiety. If you look at these systems of propaganda, they're predicated on being able to check against your fear and or anxiety, right? Like government. Oh, the government's going to rescue you now. Don't worry. But then every time you turn around, the government's churning up this fear. And it's weird because Obama came out in an interview recently, said, oh, our debt's sustainable for 10 more years, don't worry. But then he was just on TV last week going, we're going to lose firefighters and the world's going to go to hell. And you know what I mean?
I call this an open war against reality. And they have a term called gaslighting, where it's the famous play and then a film in the 40s where the guy's beating his wife, doing horrible things to her, but going, I'm not doing this. And some people, it's like a learned helplessness or Stockholm syndrome. They then because if you just deny something, it has a weird effect on people. It's like they're trying to overturn reality. What would you say to that?
I look at it like this. you've been talking to a minority, right, for 10, 15 years. And the minority has grown. It's an impressive minority, but it's still the minority. You talk to, let's say you talk to 10 million people in a week. There's still another 290 million plus that you're not talking to.
And there's 7 million worldwide.
Okay. So what happens when, let's say in the next year, and you know, some of these doomful things happen. What happens when 20, 30 million people wake up? You know, just like any anticipated event. You know, like the whole thing with the National Guard, and, you know, if there's some sort of calamity, God forbid.
Why are they buying bullets, tanks?
What I'm saying is, we're seeing on some level, if you're correct in your analysis, that there's a preparation for government to step in that void. Let's say there's social anarchy or food riots or whatever, all these horrible things that have been predicted. The government's ready to step into that void.
And play the part of hero.
Thank you. If you want to be cynical about it, what we're seeing right now is a turf war, right? A turf war between old Republicans, you know, the Rush Limbaugh, what they call the old white men crowd, you know, as they're struggling for definition in a rapidly changing America. Then you have the coming immigrant classes, which way they're going to go. You know, social liberals who are willing to look the other way while we're doing, you know, these terrible things around the world with drones. I mean, suddenly now those things aren't big issues to social liberals, which is
black sites, torture.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable to me that these are not mainstream issues on the front pages every day when our government is openly acknowledging in many ways.
Warrantless wiretapping.
Just the fact that we're being spied on blows my mind.
They came out in Reuters and said, yeah, the Pentagon, everybody reads your bank account every day. I mean, totally illegal. Nixon was going to go to jail for it, and now it's just like big deal.
Right. So my point is so you see a turf war, right? So here's this dividing line. Okay, let's say free thinkers like you and I are over here, and we're in our little huddled mass, and then this crowd over here who wants to control everything, and let's call it the uninformed in the middle. Well, this turf war is going on. It's like a football game where nobody can really score a touchdown, right? They haven't stamped people like you and me out. And certainly we're not going to stamp them out anytime soon. So it's back and forth. But if something happens where there's this open moment where suddenly 10, 20 million people are suddenly searching for new information because something gets exposed, you know what I mean? I think you have to be able to step into that void with a message that's greater than fear or greater than the counter response to the fear. Because, look, and you and I have talked in private besides publicly. And you know, as I said when I said it in the same spot before, even if you're right, it's so hard for your average American to believe it's true. Do you know what I mean? So there's a sort of a transitional moment. It's like you know, in the Matrix when they realize they're in the Matrix. There's sort of a moment like, how is this even possible? Or when they talk about people get out of jail and they just want to go back to jail.
Well, it's like the reality's so bad. The guy goes, "I want back in the Matrix."
That's my point. That's my point. I know people, and I'm sure many of your listeners have these conversations around dinner tables where, you know, you reel off a list of facts. Did you realize this? And they go, I just don't want to know. I mean, they're raising their hands.
And it's because they have a legitimate point. The power structure seized. What do you do about it anyways? But then if you give in, that just greases the skid.
But my point is those people that sit around those dinner tables that admit to their son or their daughter or their uncle, hey, you got a point. I know things are weird and government, but I'm not going to do it. But there will come a point where it's going to touch them in a way where they're going to have to do something. Let's be cold. It's a game, right? This is a big game, and who gets to win and who gets to control how the pieces move about the board. Okay, there is going to come a point.
They may knock the whole board off.
Well, that may happen. But that would only happen if they're willing to admit that people like you are right. Right?
That'll be a double down.
That's like the double down, right? Mm-hmm. Right. But the point is let's say there's something cataclysmic, worthy of knocking all the pieces off the board.
A nuke goes off.
Worthy of shutting down the internet, worthy of silencing any dissident voices, even ones that would be considered mild dissident voices, like has happened in other historical moments of tyranny, right? And every time it was the same justification. We're doing this for the motherland or the fatherland, or the excuse will exist. It's what the populace does in that moment that